Welcome back to the channel where stories come alive and help you learn English in the most natural way. Today, I'm going to tell you about a boy who couldn't read until he was 12 years old. A boy who was so difficult in school that teachers didn't know what to do with him. A boy who dropped out of college, slept on friends' floors, and collected empty Coke bottles just to buy food. But that boy grew up and changed the world. His name? Steve Jobs. How did a restless, rebellious child who struggled to read become the founder of Apple, the most valuable company on the planet? How did he turn a small garage into an empire that put a computer in every home? This is a story not just about technology. It's about being different. It's about trusting your gut when the whole world says you're wrong. It's about losing everything and finding the strength to keep going. And as always, this story will help you improve your English. With clear storytelling, useful vocabulary, and powerful life lessons, you will learn while you listen. Now, let's begin from the very start. In the year 1955, in San Francisco, a baby boy was born. His birth mother was a young, unmarried student. She could not keep him. She wanted her child to have a better life, so she made the painful decision to give him up for adoption. There was a couple, Paul and Clara Jobs, a working-class family who had been waiting for a baby. Paul was a mechanic, good with his hands. Clara was an accountant. They wanted a child more than anything. When the adoption agency called, they were overjoyed. But the birth mother had one condition. The adopting parents must promise that the boy would go to college. Paul and Clara were not rich. They had never gone to college themselves. But they looked into the baby's eyes and said, "We promise." They named him Steve. Steve grew up in Mountain View, California, a place that would later be called Silicon Valley. From the outside, it was a simple home. But inside, something was different. Paul Jobs spent hours with his son in the garage. He taught him how to take apart machines, how to build things, how to use his hands. One day, little Steve asked, "Dad, what's that?" pointing to a part. Paul said, "That's a carbon microphone. It turns sound into electricity." Steve's eyes lit up. The invisible world suddenly felt real. But life was not easy. At school, Steve struggled badly. He could not read. Words on the page jumped around. He was bored. He didn't want to sit still. He wanted to move, to build, to ask impossible questions. Teachers called him difficult. He played tricks on his classmates. He set off small explosives in the schoolyard. He once let a snake loose in the classroom. The teachers didn't understand him. They wanted a quiet student who followed the rules. Steve was the opposite. He often came home crying. He said, "I hate school. It's boring. They don't let me think." His father understood. Paul told the teacher, "It's not his fault. He's bored because you're not teaching him anything interesting." But still, Steve couldn't read well until he was 12. Can you imagine? A boy who could barely read grew up to create devices that millions of people used to read every day. The turning point came in the 4th grade. A new teacher, Imogene Hill, saw something special in Steve. She didn't punish him for being different. She challenged him. She said, "If you finish all your math work, I'll give you $5. Steve was amazed. A teacher who actually believed in him? He finished all the math. Then he wanted more. She gave him special projects. She gave him tools to take apart and put back together. For the first time, Steve felt seen. Later, he said, "I learned more from that one teacher than from all the others put together. If it weren't for her, I probably would have ended up in jail." High school was a strange mix. Steve was still a loner, but he was also curious. He had a paper route. He loved music. Bob Dylan became his hero, the poet, the rebel, the outsider who changed the world with words and a guitar. Most importantly, he discovered electronics. A neighbor, an engineer named Larry Lang, introduced him to the world of hobbyist computers. He showed Steve how to build a frequency counter. Steve was hungry, not for school, but for knowledge. He spent hours at Hewlett-Packard meetings asking questions. One day, he called Bill Hewlett directly and asked for spare parts for a school project. Hewlett was so impressed by the boy's bravery that he not only sent the parts, but also offered him a summer job. At that same time, 5 years older, a boy named Steve Wozniak was building his own computers. Woz was a genius engineer. He loved circuits. He didn't care about money or fame. He just wanted to make beautiful machines. When Steve Jobs met Woz, the connection was electric. Jobs saw what Woz could do, and he knew how to sell it. They became friends. They pulled pranks together. And they dreamed of changing the world. After high school, Steve was expected to go to college. His birth mother's promise echoed in his family. So, in 1972, he enrolled at Reed College, an expensive liberal arts school in Oregon. But Steve's heart wasn't in it. The classes were boring. The tuition was destroying his parents' savings. He felt guilty. He felt lost. He wandered around campus, sleeping in friends' dorm rooms, returning Coke bottles for 5 cents, walking 7 miles every Sunday night for a free meal at the Hare Krishna Temple. And then he dropped out. It wasn't easy. He was scared. But he also felt a strange sense of relief. He didn't have to take required classes anymore. Instead, he could drop in on the ones that truly interested him. One of those classes was calligraphy. On the surface, it seemed useless. Beautiful handwriting, serif and sans serif typefaces, the art of spacing. But Steve was fascinated. He loved the elegance, the history, the invisible design that made letters beautiful. He didn't know it then, but that one useless class would later shape the entire personality of the Macintosh computer and every Apple product. In 1974, Steve returned to his parents' home in California. He needed direction. So he got a job at Atari, the famous video game company. But his real plan was bigger. He wanted to travel to India. India was calling him. He was searching for spiritual meaning. He had questions that no computer could answer. So he saved money and, with a friend, he traveled east. In India, Steve shaved his head, wore Indian clothes, and walked dusty village roads. He met holy men, meditated, and tried to find enlightenment. But what he found was something different. He saw intense poverty, but also deep peace. He returned to America with a clearer head. He was still searching, but now he understood something important. Intuition was not the enemy of reason. It was a partner. His hero Bob Dylan sang, "He not busy being born is busy dying." Steve was determined to be born again and again. Back in California, Woz was busy building a machine that would change everything. He had designed a small, affordable computer board. He showed it to his friends at the Homebrew Computer Club. Everyone was amazed. But Woz just wanted to give the design away for free. Steve Jobs had a different idea. "Let's sell it," he said. Woz wasn't sure. Sell it? Who would buy it? But Steve insisted. "Even if we lose money, at least we'll have a company. That's something to tell our grandkids." So, in 1976, in the Jobs family garage, Apple Computer was born. Steve sold his Volkswagen van. Woz sold his HP calculator. They got $1,300. They built the first 50 Apple I computers by hand. A local shop ordered 50 units for $500 each. The race had begun. But the Apple I was just a circuit board. No keyboard. No screen. No case. It was for hobbyists, not ordinary people. Steve knew that to really change the world, they needed something beautiful. Something anyone could use. The Apple II, released in 1977, was that machine. It had a sleek plastic case, unheard of at the time. It had color graphics. It had a built-in keyboard. And it was designed not just for engineers, but for everyday people, students, teachers, families. It was a huge success. Suddenly, Apple wasn't a garage project anymore. It was a real company. By the age of 25, Steve Jobs was a millionaire. By 26, he was on the cover of Time magazine. But the hunger didn't stop. In 1979, Steve visited Xerox PARC, a research center. There, he saw something magical, a graphical user interface with windows, icons, and a little pointer moved by a mouse. Steve later said, "It was like looking at a map that showed the future." He knew this was the next great leap. He poured everything into a new computer, the Macintosh. The team worked like mad artists. They screamed, they cried, they created. Steve was a difficult leader, demanding, impossible, driven. He pushed people to their limits. But he also inspired them to do the best work of their lives. When the Macintosh launched in 1984, the world gasped. The famous 1984 ad showed a woman smashing a screen of Big Brother. It was a statement. Apple would free us from boring, faceless computers. The Mac was a machine for poets, musicians, and dreamers. But sales were slow. The Mac was expensive and it didn't have enough software. Tensions grew inside the company. Steve clashed with John Sculley, the CEO he had famously recruited from Pepsi with the words, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" Now, the very person he had brought in was turning against him. The board of directors lost faith. In 1985, they stripped Steve of all responsibilities. He was pushed out, fired from the company he had founded. He was 30 years old. The pain was unbearable. He later said, "I was publicly out, and it was devastating. I even thought about running away from Silicon Valley." But deep inside, something small was stirring. A quiet voice that said, "Don't stop. Your work isn't finished." So, he started again. He founded a new computer company called Next. He bought a small animation studio from George Lucas and called it Pixar. Next wasn't a huge commercial success, but its technology was incredible. Pixar created Toy Story, the first fully computer-animated film, and changed cinema forever. And then, something no one expected. In 1997, Apple was dying. The company had lost its way. They needed a miracle. And they turned to the very person they had thrown out. Steve Jobs returned to Apple. He did what he did best. He simplified, he imagined, and he led. The iMac, the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, products that reshaped music, phones, and personal computing, all came from the mind of a man who once couldn't read. Steve's story didn't end with getting fired. It began there. Now, what can we learn from this? First, don't be afraid to be different. The very things that made Steve difficult in school, his restlessness, his endless questions, his refusal to follow rules, were the things that later made him a visionary. The world needs people who see differently. Second, trust that the dots will connect. When Steve dropped out of college, he felt lost. But that calligraphy class, that trip to India, that curiosity about design, none of it was wasted. You cannot connect the dots looking forward, only backward. So you have to trust that they will somehow connect in your future. Third, losing everything is not the end. When Steve was fired from Apple, it felt like death. But it was actually a liberation. It freed him to enter one of the most creative periods of his life. Sometimes life hits you with a brick. Don't lose faith. Finally, stay hungry, stay foolish. This was Steve's own advice to graduates. Never settle. Never think you have arrived. Always ask, what's next? The moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop growing. Steve Jobs once said, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers. The round pegs in the square holes. The ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo." You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And maybe, just maybe, you're one of those people. So whatever you're struggling with today, whether it's learning English, finding your path, or feeling like you don't fit in, remember the boy who couldn't read until age 12. He didn't accept the world as it was. He imagined the world as it could be. And then he built it. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart or taught you something new, please hit that like button and subscribe. Comment below, what part of Steve Jobs' journey surprised you the most? I read every comment. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep building, and never, ever give up. Bye for now.